your introduction. And just for those in the audience, we are going to start off with a panel, but if you have any questions, feel free to drop them throughout, and we'll make sure we'll save some Q&A at the end for all of you to ask us questions about what we do and kind of our career pathways. So I'll just kind of kick it off in terms of the conversation. So, you know, some of us work on consumer, some work on enterprise. Do you guys feel like there's really a difference between designing for those two different types of products? Because isn't it the same at the end of the day, right? We're all people and humans. So I'm just kind of curious from your different perspectives. And why don't we have Jacob start off with that question?
Yeah. So I think there are unique differences, although to your point, Kristine, you know, design is we have specific frameworks and processes where we think about and empathize with the people using the experiences we're gonna use, and they're all humans. We all share similar human experiences, feelings, and emotions. But I think what are the differences is sort of the flavor of the complexity involved. So when you're thinking about enterprise products, you're thinking about teams, companies, workflows. You're thinking about groups of people accomplishing a task. So in LinkedIn's case, I am a recruiter who, this is my day job. I'm paid to come on this product and to find talent. And so my emotions in this experience are going to look a little different than on the consumer side as a job seeker, where I come on LinkedIn, I maybe don't pay for LinkedIn, I use it for free, but I'm looking for opportunity. I might be a career pivoter. I might be someone who's desperately looking for work because I just got laid off because of COVID-19 pandemic situations. And so there's so much more of a range of emotions that tend to happen on very consumer-facing sides that I think designers need to really bring in a different flavor of empathy. So that's the way I look at it. It's very much about the different kinds of sort of human perspectives and how you're sort of thinking about that on each side.
Awesome. Ethan, I'd love to get your perspective too, because on Pages, we work on both like the member and, you know, the enterprise company perspective. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree a lot with what Jacob said. I think it just comes down to B2B and B2C are two fairly different audiences. Yes, we're all humans, but with B2B, someone is actually using that product to do their job. And so yeah, I think with B2C, you're generally working with a much broader audience, and especially at LinkedIn, because we're international, you know, I'm designing experiences, or we're designing experiences for, yes, people in the Bay Area in tech, but we're also designing, you know, experiences for people in healthcare in Florida and, you know, agriculture in some other countries. So the audience is just massive when it comes to consumer. And so when you're designing those experiences, it really comes down to like being as intuitive and as accessible as you possibly can so that you can reach like the broadest audience possible. I think one of the other things is just on like the business side. So when you're working in B2B, at least with my experience working B2B at LinkedIn, you know, there's a lot more, I want to say, business-driven kind of decisions. And that's not always the case, but I think more so than consumer, you're really looking, you know, at what's going to drive the most business value here, because the B2B products are our money makers. And so it's like that is part of the decision-making process. And I don't think we feel that nearly as much on the consumer side of things. So just kind of as you're going through that process and you're working with product and engineering and sales and marketing and all these other functions, I think just the mindset can be a little bit different at times.
Awesome. Molly, is there anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, so I think Ethan and Jacob really hit the nail on the head. I think that designing for B2C and B2B are, you know, they're very similar in that people should, you know, experience intuitive navigation, relevant information, and all that kind of stuff. So they're the same in that sense, but they are very mutually exclusive, audiences. And so, you know, one might require, for instance, B2C would require more like emotion, bringing more brand loyalty and that kind of stuff. So I think that B2B is more like, wanting to provide people with detailed information and kind of being a little bit more hand holding to people. So I think some of those things can just be very different between the two.
Awesome. And then Molly, back at you. I'm just kind of curious, you've designed a lot of consumer stuff at LinkedIn. What are some unique challenges that you've had to face when designing specifically for consumer? And maybe you can cover some rewarding aspects of that too.
Yeah, totally. So one thing is it's really important to stay super relevant to increase like conversions and to maintain, like I said, brand loyalty. So designing for B2C requires a lot of like A/B testing. And this often involves like really small little changes that you have to really closely monitor those tests to make sure that you're following that data and that you're making super quick changes based on that. I think one thing that I really enjoy is the really fast pace of B2C. There's also a lot more opportunity for risk taking in the consumer space. People are a lot more accepting of like change and new things because like Ethan said earlier, they're not necessarily always using this to do their job, but more of like a personal day-to-day kind of thing. And so it's just kind of a rewarding challenge to figure out how to keep people interested in your product, engage with your product, and make it so that they're keeping with you instead of going to a competitor, which is very easy in the consumer space.
That's cool. Ethan, what about you?
Yeah, so just kind of resonating with what Molly just said, I think you're vying for people's free time when it comes to consumer. No one's paid to be using your product. So I think there are challenges in that, is like, how can you make this the most engaging experience possible and providing a lot of value. I think one of the other unique challenges, at least at LinkedIn, what I've noticed is because the LinkedIn product, the consumer product is quite large. There's a lot of teams on the consumer side. So you have profile, search, messaging, notifications, feed, like the list goes on. That's just like barely scratching the surface. And so I think there's a lot of collaboration and trying to remain consistent across all of these different pillars. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges just day to day, is if you're working on something that touches another team or multiple other teams, touches their surfaces that they're working on, there's a lot of discussions and collaboration that has to occur where you're talking to their product team, their designers, their engineers, and making sure that everything is like they're okay with what you're going to put on their page or vice versa. And so that's something that can be a challenge, but also I think a lot of fun, because you get to really interact and engage with a lot of other folks in the same function and also different ones. And then in terms of rewards, I think back when I worked on the careers team, the same team that Molly worked on, one of the most rewarding experiences was just knowing that the stuff that we were building, the stuff that we were producing, was geared towards helping job seekers find jobs. And so I think in the consumer space, it depends on the product you're working on, obviously, but designing these experiences that really hopefully bring a lot of value to someone in their life. And I think, they want to use your product because it brings them value or it brings them joy in one way or another, I think can be really rewarding.
Cool, thanks for that. Katie and Jacob, now I'm kind of interested from your guys' perspective, because the two of you work on enterprise sides of things. So same question, what are some of the unique challenges that you face? And then what are some rewarding aspects of designing for enterprise? So Katie, maybe you start first and then Jacob.
Sure. This is actually super fresh in my mind right now because I just started a new project. So some of the things that are most rewarding are also the most challenging, and I can speak to them specifically. So I think the first thing is, working on B2B, it's harder to put yourself in the shoes of the person that you're designing for. And so I think with consumer facing products, if I was designing for like Fitbit, for example, I'm a Fitbit user. So I have an idea of what my experience is like. But as a marketer, it's interesting because I used to be a marketer, but I'm not a marketer anymore. The tools changed. I don't always know the exact problems that a specific type of marketer is going through, or even the tools that they're using today. Because when I did marketing, I was like, 5 years ago, and all these tools have moved on. So I think that's one of the biggest challenges, but also that's something that's really rewarding. I almost think of it like method acting in a weird way, how like method actors like completely embody that, the person or the character. I feel like when I get deep into a product, I'm like thinking like a marketer, and like I'll be in the shower and an idea will pop into my head. It's like, oh, that's the thing I need to design because that's the problem. So it's always kind of like hard to kind of get into this new space. Once you do, it's really rewarding. And the second kind of challenge I think that you face with B2B versus B2C is that I think the problems tend to be really, really complex. And this is me speaking from someone who hasn't worked on B2C, but working on enterprise products, the systems mapping can be incredibly complex, and the tools that we're building are incredibly complex. So using, again, campaign creation, if I'm a marketer and I want to create a campaign, there's specific targeting criteria that's used to target an audience. And that targeting criteria requires something called Boolean logic, which is like a specific mathematical way to target a specific group of people. And so as a designer, you have to be able to explain how that works. An interesting analogy is like, zipper. We all know how a zipper works, but can you actually explain how a zipper works? And so as a designer, you have to actually be able to explain how like the teeth come together in that apparatus, in the zipper, and kind of close. And that's how the zipper works. So you're kind of doing that with every single thing that you work on to a lot of people. So you have to understand really complex spaces.
Cool, Jacob.
Katie, I loved all of that. It really brought up a lot for me around like, yeah, what are the challenges, but also what is super rewarding. And you're so spot on by saying that there's a different kind of empathy in the enterprise space that goes on where we tend to also, because tends to be people's work, they're the experts at what they do. They're either very technical. You might be working on a product that uses a lot of insights, data. Maybe it's a data scientist who's going in and trying to find an anomaly in a very complex big data product. And me as a designer, I'm not that. Like that isn't my specialty. And so you really get to practice this skill of really mediating and facilitating what it's like to understand one's mental model, right? I don't have to be an expert in knowing how to be a data scientist, but I have to be able to find similar language, to level set, to sort of really get myself outside of my shoes and dive deep into that area so that I can really understand the problems and the pain points that one is experiencing when doing something that's actually like pretty complex themselves. And what's also pretty challenging too is that I think there's a level of technicality that's also required. And it can be a very tech-driven technicality to it too. So I often find myself collaborating very deeply with my engineer partners when I'm on an enterprise project, because there's a lot more sort of technicality. Functionality is different, can be different, many more complex settings. And I have to be the gatekeeper to make sure it still is making sense for the user so that they can do their best job, they can do their best work. I think the last thing I'll say is that in the enterprise space, there's different kinds of decision makers in kind of the product, like in experiencing the product. So like, for instance, understanding like who is deciding that this particular team is going to use this product is really interesting as well. And so I guess the point I'm making is that there's this kind of mapping you have to do to understand what are the other influences outside of one's individual decisions that you have to kind of be aware of. So what's going on in that data scientist team and who's deciding that they're going to use that tool. So I'm really trying to empathize with how someone thinks about all those different areas of their work and who's deciding on, who's actually going in and using the product as well. So.
Cool. Yeah, thanks for those in-depth answers. So I guess back at you, Katie and Jacob, when you guys design for enterprise spaces, how do you build empathy for the products and the people that you design for. Especially, I'm seeing in the chat, there's some folks here who work in healthcare or in financial tech, and those get really complicated and highly specialized. So how do you start thinking about that when you're designing your problems? Katie, maybe you start first, and then Jacob.
Sure. Yeah, so I think the process is similar to at least what I kind of learned in grad school for B2B and B2C. So you can apply it in both spaces, but research, do your desk research, do your primary research, talk to people. I think one of the challenges that even we face at LinkedIn is like resourcing. I just started a new project. We don't always have a dedicated researcher who I can work with to like go talk to. Jacob is talking about like data scientists, for example. I don't always have access to those people. So what you have to do is or what I've had to do is get a little scrappy. I'm really lucky in that I'm married to a marketer. So I can just walk into my living room and say, hey, could you show me your Salesforce dashboard? But what I've also done kind of as a learning is I've built like a panel of marketers internally within LinkedIn who use our products that I can turn to whenever I'm kicking off a project and I want to more deeply understand a space, or even after I've done that foundational research, I can go back to them and say, hey, I have this design. I have this really specific question. Can you just look at this and kind of gut check it for me? So that's been really helpful. I think the other thing too is like put yourself in their shoes. So, designing for advertising products, I'll then look at like, what is Google Ads doing? What is Facebook doing? And that's great. But again, I'm not a marketer today, so my dashboard doesn't have data in it. So the other thing I'll do too is when I go to this panel of marketers, and actually this is great about being in the remote world, is I'll have them bring up their dashboards and actually like we'll watch them walk through their flow. And so I can see like what they're looking at, what they're not looking at. And that's been super, super helpful for me.
Cool. Jacob, any thoughts?
Yeah, there's so many really exciting and fun methods that you can use as a designer that I think most of us know about to really empathize and understand. I really like to think about it as one's mental model, like how are they really thinking about and cognitively understanding tasks. So usability testing like over and over and over is so important, especially in enterprise, because you're really thinking about task-based sort of designs, like very complex task-based. So usability testing, just helps really build in that rapid environment your understanding of how someone's actually going through their emotions, how they're clicking through things. And of course, that's testing your assumptions because you aren't that data scientist, a recruiter, a marketer. And so that's really helpful. I also think other methods around like whiteboarding, sticky notes, facilitation, really inviting people into sort of collaboration spaces is really important for enterprise too. So really building your skill set in facilitating workshops in enterprise is super important because that gives you an opportunity to invite in that recruiter and really map out for you what that journey looks like. And that sort of co-design begins to happen. And you really get to start to form a relationship with that material. It's really, really important. So you're really building your skill set as someone who can, master complexity, empathy, and also feel grounded in what you're doing. So yeah, those are some really key methods that are really important in that space to empathize.
Awesome, Jacob. And I just saw a chat question that kind of followed up to one thing that you mentioned about usability testing. How many rounds of usability testing would you do with enterprise products?
That's a good question. I think it really depends. So in past experiences, I've done 3 rounds, and what we work in, so because I work on recruiting products, we can talk to our internal recruiters at LinkedIn. We set up what we call lemonade stands, like an internal research program where we can actually go and do usability testing with our own LinkedIn recruiters, and we show them designs and we do usability testing. And we talk to maybe 5 recruiters, and it's just 1 round. So in that case, we're really trying to get a variety of just different users in it. And oftentimes it just needs 1 round I'll then go work on the design, and then maybe later in the phase, do another lemonade stand. But in other situations, I've really had to do several rounds, especially when the thing is very complex. So I think it all depends, and it also just depends on your audience and who you're actually talking to.
Cool, awesome. Well, let's just shift gears to talk about the consumer side of things for a bit. So Ethan and Molly, you guys both talked a lot about the importance of scale when it comes to designing for consumer experiences. Particularly at LinkedIn, we have like hundreds of millions of users on our platform. They're also global. They're like all over the world, different languages. So you have to consider that aspect of it too. So how do you consider designing for scale when it comes to consumer? Let's start with Molly, and then we'll go over to Ethan.
Yeah, totally. So on the consumer side, you know, when you go to, when you're designing for a consumer website, there's most likely going to be a lot more traffic than on an enterprise site. And you also have to really pay attention to making people be loyal to your brand, which means, you know, making sure that you're providing people with a clear experience that that's going to be, you know, not even or better than the competitors, right? So you have to stimulate like fast action. People don't really like to make a lot of decisions. They, you know, you have to kind of make it so that people can make their decisions quickly, being very clear and concise. But another thing is that if you're being also very clear and concise while, you know, having all these people who with different abilities, different knowledge bases, it's much more of a challenge to try to, you know, take people who are in a lot of different situations and show them one product that can, you know, be relevant to everyone. And so you also have to consider, you know, like Kristine was saying, in languages, you know, if you're designing something in English, you know, our language is a lot of times much shorter than, you know, like Russian or German. So you have to, you know, make sure that your designs will be able to scale when you have different text in there. So, you know, if you have, for instance, just like a card or something, you know, you have to make sure that if the language goes to 3 lines, you know, it'll still be something that'll be aesthetically pleasing and, you know, easy to read and everything like that. So those are some of the things. One other thing that I wanted to say was that retaining users on the consumer side is a little bit more challenging sometimes because of, you know, it's very low risk for people to go from one product to another product, whereas on the B2B side, it's like much more difficult for people to go to another kind of product if it's something that they're using day to day, that they're very comfortable with, and it's not necessarily something that they can just switch from. And so I think that that's something you have to really consider as well.
Awesome. Ethan?
Yeah, so I think obviously, you know, there's the scale of how many users you have, how much traffic you have, which to Kristine's point, you know, there's hundreds of millions of users across the globe. So, I mean, we have a whole team that's dedicated, not design team, but we have a whole team at LinkedIn that's dedicated to international. So they're like our internationalization team. And basically we go through reviews with them so that we're going and looking at copy length, we're looking at like the imagery, we're looking at all sorts of things to basically make sure that in other languages and other cultures, this stuff is going to be okay. I remember back, I think when I was an intern a while ago at LinkedIn, we had to get rid of an icon because there were certain cultures that found it offensive. Like it was an image or visual that was offensive in other cultures. And so it's things like that where you really have to take into consideration how things are going to translate once you go outside of the United States. And even, I mean, you know, a lot of us live and work in the Bay Area at LinkedIn. And so even thinking about scaling outside of the Bay Area, it's very easy to get trapped in this way of thinking, you know, there's a bubble here. So it's just kind of interesting, how you kind of have to try to expand into these other locations and really try to be, have empathy for people who don't necessarily have the same, live in the same zip code as you. I think one of the other things, so there's scale in terms of like actual people, users coming to your product, and then there's the scale of the product itself. So because LinkedIn is such a relatively large product, and there are a lot of different teams and a lot of different pillars, you also have to think about how your my one particular project or my one particular experience scales in the broader ecosystem of LinkedIn. And so, an example of something that happened recently, I had an experience that went like hand in hand with our LinkedIn profile. Like it would be perfect on the profile and it would add value to the profile. But that team already had a very robust and dense roadmap ahead of them. And so we weren't able to work with them. We weren't able to get on their roadmap. So basically now it's like this thing that we could technically scale through, collaboration with another team. We now have to take it back and be like, okay, that's not an option. How do we still scale this so that users are going to, get the benefit from it, but maybe in a different way that we have more control over. So those are other things that you think about. And then when you're ramping these things, it's like, you're not just keeping track of like your own metrics, like, oh, how many clicks is this getting? But it's like, are we detracting something from somewhere else? And so it's really like just kind of juggling all these different elements to make sure that everything is living, copacetic.
Cool. Thanks, Ethan, for that. That's actually a really nice segue into our next section. I want to talk a little bit more about collaboration and what that means with like different stakeholders. So Katie and Jacob, since you guys work on the enterprise side, I think sometimes designers working in the enterprise space have to deal with the perspectives of the sales and marketing team a lot more, especially if they're really large customers that are spending a lot. They might be very vocal in terms of like, influencing the roadmap. So you kind of have to take into consideration their points of views. So how do you balance out those needs when it comes to monetization and making customers happy versus what's the best user experience? So Katie, maybe you start there and then we can go to Jacob.
Sure. Yeah, happy to talk about this. So you do have to find a fine balance. Something you have to be careful of when you design is you don't want to over-index for people that are novice users, new to your platform. You equally don't want to over-index on somebody on the other side who has a ton of experience or maybe is a power user. So what we talk about in our team is designing for that perpetual intermediate, and that's someone that's maybe was an expert and then they haven't used the platform in a while and now they're kind of in that middle space, but they're constantly like reaching up. Or maybe it's someone who's new to the platform and they're skilling up. So we design the majority of our experiences for that perpetual intermediate, while we still consider people that are kind of on the power user side and kind of a novice user. The other thing I'll say too is that these power users can actually be an incredible resource. And so typically there's a sales rep or a customer rep that's paired with a company that spends a lot of money on our platform, for example, and they have a lot of opinions, which is great. So what we can do is like, if we're working on a project and we want to kind of vet an idea or get their feedback on it, they're always super willing to just set up like a half hour with a customer rep and just get additional feedback. So I always like to think about them as a really great resource. Kind of the other cool thing that we've done, and I just finished a project where we actually did this. There was a team within LinkedIn that built an alpha product for the people that spent a lot of money and wanted some bespoke insights. So rather than like designing a full-fledged product that would take like many years to actually build out, there was a team within LinkedIn that just built kind of like a mini version of it, an alpha. And then I just took the remaining, like now that we had that initial batch of feedback, last quarter, I kind of built up the beta product with a roadmap to go to general access, which is really cool. So we got to involve our partners that way.
All right, Jacob.
Yeah, and just touching on collaboration, especially if you find yourself working at a company where you're working with you could be working with so many other kinds of departments at scale, like at LinkedIn. We're working with not only our product partners, engineering partners, data scientists, but also marketers, we're working with sales, we're working with customer success managers, and we're really all trying to think about the problem space. And each one of those collaborators brings a different perspective, and designers have this unique role and skill set to really bring everyone around a problem. And so I think Katie was really hitting on it for working with. So I work in the talent solutions, the recruiter space, and our biggest customers are a lot of these large tech companies like Facebook, Google, that are paying a lot to find talent. Also, talent solutions is LinkedIn's moneymaker. It's the most revenue generating part of our business. So there's a lot of also C-suite sort of look at our decisions and what we're making. So it's a lot about sort of using that to your advantage and saying, as a sales rep, people are talking directly with the customer in a different kind of way. Maybe it's that customer who's paying all this money to use it, and they have specific feedback that they're giving directly to the customer success manager or the sales rep, partnering with them and saying, hey, what is that feedback? What have they been saying? And use that as a research opportunity is really neat. And it's just another way to kind of gain information. I think on the other end, to Katie's point, we could easily over-index on these bigger customers. Like, we also have to think about other segments like mid-market companies, SMB companies, which stands for small to medium businesses, and really think about how it works for them as well. And so for me, it's about making sure I build the case for why we make sure we are also considering these other kinds of customers. And yeah, just showing a lot of data and making sure we're, to Ethan's point also, around being cross-cultural, I think you also have to think about making sure it's really working for many different kinds of businesses and sizes of businesses as well. So it's a different kind of inclusive mindset and diversity mindset.
Cool. Awesome. And I think we'll do one more question for the panel, and then we'll open it up for Q&A here. So Molly and Ethan, you guys have a different set of challenges when it comes to collaboration, working on the consumer side, especially at LinkedIn. Like Ethan, you mentioned there's so many different teams. It's really important to have a single cohesive product to consumers as well. So how do you guys accommodate what other designers are working on at LinkedIn across these different pillar teams to make sure that there is cohesion across all the designs when it's designing for consumer? Maybe Molly, you could start first, and we'll go over to Ethan.
Yeah. So yeah, very good point. Especially at LinkedIn, when there's like so many different teams, you have to really make sure that you understand like a lot of different areas of the product. So, if you're working on one team and you're probably most likely going to be working on something that touches the product of another team. So you really have to like maintain those relationships and not only work with people who you are like doing something with at that specific time, but like you have to know, oh, this person, in the future is going to be working on a feature that's going to touch my feature. So that involves like going to other people's reviews or just really keeping on top of various areas of the product to make sure that you're never going to design something that's going to be completely different than what someone else in the company is going to be designing. And yeah, so just like close collaboration with everybody who is not only involved with your product, but people who might potentially be involved with your product in the future. And yeah, so I think that just like maintaining those relationships is really important.
Great. Ethan?
Yeah, I mean, huge +1 to what Molly said. I think relationships are super important, especially as much as you can. We have, I think, around 200 designers at LinkedIn. So, and most of them, have started in the last like year or two. So it's hard to maintain those relationships, but you still need to try to communicate and collaborate as much as possible. I think also having different processes in place to kind of allow for consistency and collaboration to just kind of to happen as part of the design process is really important. So at LinkedIn, we have obviously we have our own individual design reviews, which happen locally within each team or within each product. But then beyond that, we have broader design reviews where we bring in a lot of the leadership, a lot of, you know, VP and senior director and director level folks are there, and they have a much like broader view of what's going on. And so it's really encouraged that you attend these design reviews, you know, somewhat regularly. And that allows visibility across the larger kind of ecosystem. And so you might have a director who has, you know, visibility into something else that's going on that might actually be they're trying to do the same thing that you are, but because your teams are so, you know, distant from one another, you would not know that unless you had that kind of higher level visibility to show you that. So I think that also, like, we have processes like that in place. I think we also have a dedicated team to creating patterns that we all leverage. So basically, we're talking, you know, icons, colors, buttons, text. Like these are all things that is like relatively easy to maintain consistency. Obviously, each experience is going to need its own, you know, its own experience. But these are things, these elements are pretty easy to keep consistent. So we have a team that kind of keeps us in check and keeps these things updated, keeps it fresh. And they regularly kind of brief all the designers on, you know, any major changes or updates. I know there was a question in the chat, like we recently had a major update last year for our patterns and for our colors and iconography and illustrations and everything. And so there is a dedicated team that kind of works to keep that stuff in line. So yeah, I think the bigger you get, the more important it is that you kind of have these processes in place to really help facilitate that collaboration and that consistency.
Awesome. Well, thanks, guys. So I do want to be mindful of time. We have about 10 minutes left. So I wanted to give an opportunity for the audience to ask us any questions. We can also stay over the LinkedIn group a little bit to make sure that we get through people's questions. But if people have to drop, feel free to. So we'll just turn it over from here. Tom and Lars, did you guys want to facilitate it, or should I just pick questions? Or
I'd be happy to catch us up from the chat, and then from there, perhaps people can just shout them out, the questions they have.
Sounds good.
One of the first questions was from Tim, and it was, how do you customize your design, stay relevant, and empathize with different regions and cultures globally?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I can start this one. So one is we do have teams in kind of our major areas. So like we have a team in China, we have a team in Japan, we have a team in India. I think we're starting to get more teams or more folks in Europe and some of those regions. So we have these like major areas that are kind of like major focuses for LinkedIn, because that's where we have like hubs of significant amount of users. So I think, you know, that's one, we've become a little bit more dispersed in that way. So we can kind of, and I mean, like the China team has their own dedicated app that's different than LinkedIn. We do have like a core LinkedIn app, but they've also created, you know, other things. Same with India. They have a light app that works better with, you know, data, and how much data they're using on their phone is really important over there. So we try to take these things into consideration for these different hubs. And then on top of that, it's, you know, we also try to do research in certain areas, you know, in certain locations, especially if we're trying to maybe break into that area. We'll try to do dedicated research in there and kind of understand a little bit more about the culture. I know we did a couple of years ago, we did a pretty extensive amount of research for job seeking and like, you know, applying to jobs and whatnot throughout Europe and China. So I think that's just what we try to do, is we try to actually get into those regions and talk to the people that are there and do the best we can.
So just kind of a follow-up question there. So it sounds like you have kind of a mixed and a blended approach of like having both designers in different geographic regions as well as kind of like researchers in those areas.
Yeah, so we have dedicated design, you know, user research, products, everything like that in India, in China, in Japan. We might be getting a couple others, but it's really like US, China, Japan, and India are the kind of like the hubs of where we have those teams.
And Tim, I'll just add on to that too, whereas all of our designers at LinkedIn are trained to understand localization as well. So like in our design reviews regularly, we'll keep each other in check as well, just to be like, does this design feel like it's going to work culturally like in German, or we're going to run into these text wrapping issues? And if we're not sure, there's a localization team that we can reach out to help us like answer those types of questions.
Perfect, thank you.
Then Nate had a pretty specific question about the redesign. Nate, you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I'm dying to. So first off, I want to thank everybody for joining us today. For a little background, my journey to tonight was 9 months of job searching, daily on LinkedIn, power using PC, Mac, tablet, and phone. And so the complete experience, whatever screen was nearest to me. And so coming out of that, I have, from one designer to many other designers, there are things I can't wait to ask you about. I want to ask you one thing first, which is, okay, so last year in September, big redesign launch. And I'm just absolutely dying to know, in 2020, trends being what they are in software design and tech, beige is a capital C choice. And I would love if you guys could share any of the journey to landing there with us tonight.
I'll just say, I don't know if any of us were actually on the team there was a Tiger team that
you did mention that a minute ago. Yeah.
So there was a Tiger team that basically, I mean, they're not even the same team that runs all of our patterns. Some of the members were, but this was like I want to say maybe like a 2.5 year project to get there. And so I'm sure there's all sorts of market research. But basically, it's funny you say it. We wanted to get away from gray, and we went to beige. We have other colors too, but you know.
Yeah.
I can speak to some of the research that went behind that. So basically,
oh my God, I love it. Thank you.
And someone can like check me if I got this wrong, but my understanding is that, we did a lot of research to kind of understand how our brand was perceived. And before, we used a ton of blue. I don't know if I can reveal this, but we'll see. The research we got from using all this blue was that people perceived the LinkedIn brand as like a faceless corporate man, which was just really sad. And we wanted to like bring a little bit more warmth and humanity to our brand. So the branding kind of redesign we went through, beige is a part of the color palette, but if you notice, many of the other colors and the icons that we're using are trying to kind of bring more of that human touch to it, and also be much more inclusive, because now we have a platform that is kind of going beyond just white collar workers. And we're expanding our platform to support people that may not traditionally have been supported by LinkedIn, maybe people that don't have college degrees, or maybe people that work in like the restaurant or service industries, or healthcare workers, for example. So I think we're all really excited about this new direction that we're heading in. Hence the beige, moving away from white and moving more towards like warmer colors.
Yeah, I love that. That's super interesting to hear. And I definitely, like, I have it up on my other screen here, and I'm like literally looking at this, and I'm looking at your sweater, and I'm just like, God, it is more human. It is less just, sterile. And thank you very much for that. I have one other question that's super deeply nerdy, and I will only ask it if we run out of questions and still have time.
Right, I love the question, Nate. Thanks. Go ahead.
The next question was from Tim, and he's asking, do you primarily test research UI, or do you also test customer desirability? And then there's another question, how many rounds of usability testing do you usually do? And that's from Kate.
So yeah, I can speak a little bit to this. When it comes to customer desirability, we actually have really strong partnerships with our product marketing managers, our PMMs. Each team usually has a PMM that we work with, and their role is to really understand the go-to-market strategy of what we do and how it's going to be desirable to the market. So oftentimes those roles are working really closely with our user experience researcher. So those are the roles that are embedded within our design team. There's not as many researchers as there are designers, so not always do you work on a project where you have a dedicated researcher. but they're often co-collaborating with them to do market research, to really understand competitors. LinkedIn puts a lot of emphasis on our marketing because we're also consistently ranked the most trusted social networking platform. And with that comes a lot of responsibility to maintain that, because it's ours to lose. And so we have a lot of emphasis, and to Katie's point, a lot of emphasis on ensuring that that brand feel is representative of what, like, where the company's headed. But when it comes to desirability, yeah, it's really like working closely with marketing to understand like how that fits into the market and what it is that our customers really desire. And that's really helpful because it's something that we need to understand in our product. And it really also comes down to copywriting, to UX writing. How are we talking? How are we using our language in our product? What's that voice of tone? That really comes into play as well. I guess the other part of the question was about usability. I forgot what it was.
Usability testing or testing UI.
Yeah, I think I saw someone ask also, like, do we use SUS, like that system usability score? I think it just depends on the designer. It's what's really unique about LinkedIn is we really get a lot of autonomy to push our projects. We don't have anyone really telling us like, do your design process like this. So for me, I really get to choose, how am I going to conduct my testing? How am I going to work with my research partner? So I develop a research brief that makes sense to my project. It makes sense of what I'm working on. And I'll do my research to understand what are some best practices, and then consult with my researcher and then put that into play. So it really just depends, and it really depends on the scale of your project and who it's impacting.
Yeah, and we have a lot of other research methods too. Like we do foundational research when we're launching something like completely new that we have no idea what like customers might want. We also do like surveys in terms of like validating that. And in some instances, we don't even do testing at all until we launch the product. So it might be A/B testing, or we just kind of see how it does in the market and kind of get that feedback and iterate. So we try to incorporate all those different types of research methods based on the needs of the project and like the time that we have and the scale of it.
So another question was mine. Has LinkedIn always been remote, and how do you work as a team? I mean, a 200-person design team, that's such a large number. What's collaboration like? How do you sort of maintain processes? Is it always so tactical, Jacob, like you mentioned?
We love Miro. Miro's huge. So we haven't always been remote. So we went fully remote a little over a year ago. We were in the offices, all of us here are either in the Sunnyvale office, where our headquarters are in the SF office. And yeah, we were doing those. As I was explaining, I was remembering, oh, wow, I'm really talking through the perspective of pre-pandemic, where we're in the room using sticky notes. So we've had to adapt over the last year. So we've had some designers who have really focused on helping the design team think of new strategies for remote work. We have a weekly, what we call show and tell, where designers can come in and tell the design org about something they're learning or techniques. So several months back, we had some designers present best practices for remote collaboration and using Miro. So we've really had to adapt quickly. I think that's just a skill set that all designers build, is how to adapt, how to be able to, quickly change environments. It's been tough. I personally am ready to get back to the office and to really have that in-person collaboration. So it really takes a lot of being much more intentional with who I'm like setting time with, while also balancing fatigue and balancing putting too much time on people's schedule. So a lot of communication, a lot of setting boundaries, and a lot of just finding new techniques to adapt. I'm sure others have more to add to that. Yeah.
Yeah, and Lars, we actually have a program management team at LinkedIn. So their basically job is to help us coordinate across projects, and then also introduce processes and new tools for us to work more collaboratively. So they're really critical in our operations piece to making sure that we're working together well. And I wanted to answer the second part of your question, which was like, like, do the processes differ on the different teams? And it actually does. I think like what we do, like Ethan and I do on Pages, might be a different process than like what Jacob does on LTS. So like at the end of the day, we use the same tools, but how we do our design reviews or just kind of the cycle of like certain things do differ a little bit from team to team. And Molly, did you want to add on to that or?
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say, I was gonna bring up our program managers as well, but you know, one of the things that LinkedIn really prides itself on is our culture. So that's one of the things that's really kind of difficult to transfer from the office to you know, at home. So I think we've had a great team of people dedicated to trying to make that culture kind of come alive while we're all working at home. So for instance, you know, Slack channels that are not dedicated necessarily to work, but are related to, you know, helping our team maintain strong relationships. Like we'll have a daily question that we can answer. That's like, you know, what's the best thing you've seen on the internet these days? Or what did you do over the weekend? Or just kind of things to help our team bond a little bit. And because I do think that those, you know, strong relationships are really beneficial to helping you work efficiently with people. And so it's been a little bit more tough during the work at home times. Than when, you know, just like chat with someone over coffee or something at the office. But you know, having those people who are really kind of helping us maintain that strong culture has been really helpful too.
Cool, thank you. We're slowly catching up on our questions. I know we're 5 minutes over. Is it okay to just keep going?
Yeah, we can keep going.
Yeah.
Okay. So the next question is from Jacob. He's the iPhone. What's the difference in designing LinkedIn Premium versus non-paid LinkedIn, and how would that relate to consumers and enterprises?
I mean, I can start. I think Molly, you probably have some good insight on this as well. So premium only impacts certain aspects of LinkedIn, and working on the job seeking side of things, there is a premium skew to that. So obviously there's like job seeker premium. So I don't know if I would really consider premium. I definitely wouldn't consider it enterprise. It's kind of like a consumer plus. You know, they're still using our consumer platform. It's just we take some of the data that we would otherwise, you know, maybe not show users, and we basically make that data accessible. And I think the premium team, like a couple of years ago, they made a decision that like the only premium features on LinkedIn would be features that actually like cost LinkedIn. Like it costs LinkedIn money to you know, use these, to like run these features, to create these features. And so and that's the stuff, like these additional value that we would give to you know, would make accessible via a paid subscription. But yeah, I would still consider it very much consumer, just with this idea of like, how can we take this product that we already have, and if someone's going to pay money for it, how can we make it that much better and like provide that much more value? So but that's my take.
Yeah, one of the challenges is, you know, like Ethan said, trying to figure out what parts of the product are going to be free versus paid. So, you know, there's so many valuable things that we can do that we're like, oh, you know, could obviously get more people to convert to premium if they knew that we had this feature, and they could only get it on premium. But then it's also like, we want to make sure that we're giving the best experience to all of our users, even if they're not premium members. So I think it's kind of a challenge trying to work with the premium team to figure out which things we want to make only premium versus which things we want to make available to all our members. But so I don't think any of us on here have worked on the premium team. I've worked a little bit with the premium team. And so I'm sure that they would have a lot more insight than me, but I think yeah, some of the challenges are really making sure that the things that we provide only to premium members are the things that are gonna you know, actually cost us money, like Ethan said.
All right, so the last question in the chat says, How do you check your design from the accessibility perspective? I know LinkedIn has an accessibility department headed by Jennison Asuncion. Do you work within this department directly, or do you have your own design accessibility department? And that's from Kate.
I can speak to this. I just finished some designs last quarter, and I did like a month of speccing, and a good portion of that was actually speccing for accessibility. So LinkedIn is a part of Microsoft, and Microsoft has some new guidelines that they've put out, and they've really highlighted the significance and importance of making products that everybody can use. And it's really interesting to kind of look at like what, you know, when you do a competitive analysis, you might look at like, oh, what's Facebook doing? What's Google doing? And quite often we say like, oh, Facebook or Google's using this pattern, let's just use that. But then we go back to the accessibility team and they say, actually, that doesn't meet our standards. So LinkedIn has some really, we have set a really high bar to make sure everybody can use it, which is great. And so I think for a lot of people, we're kind of onboarding onto this new process. So part of it is, you know, when people do join the company, there is an onboarding part or a section that's dedicated towards accessibility. So you actually watch videos and can simulate the experience of being a non-sighted user and maybe being a keyboard only user. So if you've ever tried to like navigate a website just using a keyboard, for example, it's a very different experience. So that's been super helpful just to even see videos of what someone's experience is like. And then the other thing too is we have really rich documentation, which has been super helpful. So like, how do you spec for tab order? How do you spec like for headings? Things like that, like, you know, making sure you tag your images so that people know exactly like what an icon is, for example, if they use a keyboard reader. So we're kind of rolling out that process, but it's been really helpful to have this robust documentation. And if we do have a question, we actually have a Slack channel and office hours dedicated where once you have specs, you go and you do a review, and that's kind of a checkoff point before you hand off designs to engineering.
Thank you.
I don't know if anybody else has anything else to add to that.
Yeah, we have a design team that works with Jennison as well. So Jennison kind of focuses more on the engineering side, but we also have a designer who's helping kind of set those standards, and he's trickling it down to all of us. So
we also have like components set up in Figma, or not components, oh my gosh, plugins, similar to like Spectre, but we have one that our team has designed from an engineering perspective that are like specific to speccing out, you know, tab order and headings and labels and stuff like that. And that's been super helpful.
Thanks a lot.
And that's a proprietary plugin?
Yeah, I think so. But I'm sure there's so many plugins. I'm sure you could find something like that. Or maybe I'll just talk to the engineer and say she should make one for everybody, make it public. Cool. Do we have any more questions, or?
I know,
Lars,
Nate, you had like, you were super excited for a question, so go for it.
I'm super excited about everything, and it's my fault. Yeah, the other thing I wanted to ask about, and I know I've learned tonight about the multiple teams that you have, and that we may or may not. I missed the first part of the program tonight, getting Zoom up and running, so I didn't catch what department everyone is from. I know now that there is a messaging department. I wanted to ask about the positioning of the messaging feature within the navigational hierarchy, or occasionally bumping out of that hierarchy to the search bar, but then also being down in the little corner. As I spent months jumping from screen to screen, and the specific use case that always got me was LinkedIn on tablet versus LinkedIn on the tablet app, and finding that particular feature moves around a lot. But from what I'm gathering from the entire conversation tonight, you guys have a very rigorous testing program, and you do not make decisions lightly. So that is another journey that I would love to hear about, if anyone here has any experience in sort of the intended experience of all of that.
I mean, I don't think any of us here have personally worked on messaging But I do know, and I don't use the iPad app or the iPad browser, so I don't know what exactly that experience you're referring to is. But something that I do know, like navigationally, that a decision that was made not that long ago was, if you notice in the LinkedIn navigation on mobile, the center navigation icon and action is to post, right?
Yes.
So that was a decision that was made a while ago, and if I'm 100% honest, I believe that was a product decision from like the highest of high that you can go basically in the company, that said, we're going to focus on posting and content and creating content, and so basically messaging was bumped out of that slot. So
got it.
We went back and forth, like it happened multiple times where we like made that decision, went back, made it again. So but yeah, that's my understanding.
So follow-up question, Instagram just did that. They bumped the center take a photo button out of their main navigation, put it up in the corner where you can't find it, to do stories and things, I think, reels maybe. How do you feel about that as a designer, as a platform designer? When you saw that happen, I saw you nodding. I think you know what I'm talking about. How did you guys feel about that?
I mean, I think there was a lot of backlash from that, and I think it really, to me, what it speaks to is like, what is Instagram? What are they trying to do? And I think that's, anytime you have something take up prime real estate in the navigation, that's that company saying they really find this thing important and they want more users to do it. And that's not always a design decision. Sometimes that's a product or business decision, because this is their money maker. You know, for Instagram, they're obviously skewing towards shops and making money and, you know, things like that. So things are gonna get moved around. But I mean, that's my take. I'm sure other people here have other opinions, but yeah.
I'll just kind of bring a high level take on this, because this is fascinating, and maybe you're getting to see that at a place like LinkedIn, like we all just kind of work on so many different parts, and it's like I just learned about that, so that's really fascinating. But I think it's really important as designers to, especially if you're a designer who's interested in really being in the tech space, is understanding how your company is driven. Are you joining a company that is product driven, is design driven, is engineering driven, is sales driven? There's many different types of companies, and that's going to influence the way in which design has a seat at the table and how you're sort of bringing design to the forefront. And so I think at LinkedIn, I would probably say, and I'd love to hear other people's thoughts, we're a very product driven organization. So we really think about how the product is going to meet our mission and vision of creating economic opportunity for all members of the global workforce. And I think we've really built and established design as having a seat at the table. And I think, Lars, I think you said that there might be another event y'all are doing about that, which is great, which is like a whole other event. But I think it's really important to understand where design is in influencing decisions. And so, yeah, sometimes personally, I feel really heard that design is heard and that we're making very member user forward decisions. And I think at LinkedIn, we have a culture where we say members first. Members are what we call our users that use our main products. We say members first, so that it's very much like a cultural thing that we've created, where we sort of say we're going to prioritize what's best for the member and the user. But it's different for every company. So I would just suggest as designers to really understand how your company operates in terms of decision making and what is prioritized, and how design plays a role in that, and how you can really advocate for the most accessible, inclusive, equitable experiences that really meet the needs of people.
Jeez, thank you, Jacob. If we're closing in, I can't believe I just remembered this. I actually have a third question, because I saw a friend of mine who is I think it would be accurate to say leads the design systems team at Instagram, posting on Twitter today that he would love to have a laughing emoji on LinkedIn. posted this just this morning, and I thought that's probably not a great idea. I would not. That seems like a channel for abuse. How do you guys feel about a laughing emoji on LinkedIn? I would hate to have a job update and have someone giggle at it myself.
Yeah, so I think you're talking about the reactions underneath like the comment and the like, right? Yeah. Yeah. That's another team that created it. So I don't know 100% in terms of what they got into their process, but they spent a lot of time researching what those different emojis or reactions would be appropriate given our user base and the different global contexts as well that they had to localize for different countries. And then also just thinking about it from like a professional standpoint and like to your point, like the abuse and all of that stuff. So there's probably a decision made as to why laughing wasn't made. Wasn't included in that set. I don't know the reason why, but I think we can probably guess, like similar to like what you're saying, there could be some instances where somebody's writing like a very serious update, like I lost my job and, I really need help finding a job in the next few months. Otherwise I might lose my house. Like, and the laughing emoji might not be appropriate in those types of scenarios versus like something that's more uplifting. So we're very intentional with like those types of decisions that we're making. Well, cool.
Thank you so much for answering that.
Yeah, of course, no worries. Well, cool. Lars and Tom, is there anything else that you guys like to close out with? I know folks are probably starting to drop here, so I don't know if there's any other questions.
Yeah, I'd just be curious to, I know I talked to you about this, Kristine, but maybe everybody could just drop in the chat a couple of their takeaways from tonight. I think it'd just be really interesting to sort of take a moment and kind of reflect on some of the things that have been spoken about tonight. I know it's so easy to just like leave these conversations and kind of forget, but maybe let's just take a moment and write in the chat a couple of things that really stood out to you.
Yeah, and while we're doing that, Tom, just want to say on behalf of the LinkedIn team, thank you guys so much for spending your evenings with us to learn more about what it's like working at LinkedIn and the differences between our consumer versus enterprise process. And for those of us on the panel, feel free to reach out to any of us if you'd like to connect with us on LinkedIn. Send us a message so we know that you came to this event, and you can always have a conversation with any of us to follow up. And we always love hearing, like Nate, your questions like customer feedback and stuff like that too. So if you guys ever have anything like that, feel free to shoot them our way.
Yeah, this was super fun and so great to learn about LinkedIn and all of your processes and what you're doing over there in different departments. I mean, I can't imagine what it's like working remotely with 200 designers, but I'm sure you guys have fun. But thank you for taking the time to, an hour of your time in an evening to spend time with us. We really, really appreciate it.
Happy to be here. Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Thank you all so much.
All right. Have a good night.
Take care,
Thank
everyone.
you, Kristine.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.